Welcome to the Free Library of Philadelphia online, and thank you very much for joining us. I'm Laura Kovacs, and I'm pleased to be here. Reem Kassis is the author of The Palestinian Table, a guide to Middle Eastern cooking woven together through recipes, regional history, and 3 generations of family traditions, which won the 2018 Guild of Food Writers First Book Award and was nominated for a James Beard Foundation Cookbook Award. Her new book, The Arabesque Table, weaves together history, memoir, and recipes to bring the diverse food cultures of the contemporary Arab world to life. This evening, she will be joined in conversation with Deb Perelman, creator of the long-running Smitten Kitchen blog and author of 2 best-selling cookbooks. And now the screen is all yours.
Thank you so much for inviting me to join you for this event tonight. I'm so excited about your new book. So exciting that it comes out this week.
I know,
How
it's
does
crazy.
it feel?
I can't believe it's surreal in a way. I mean, this whole year has just been weird, and to think that the book was written, I mean, when everything was normal, and then it's coming out in the middle of a pandemic. I'm like, what's going on? But it's actually good because you get to do a lot more events virtually and see more people. So I get to see you. So I'm not complaining.
True. I would have come to Philly. I will come to Philly right now if it was safe.
I wish. I
I
know.
miss doing things. I love going to the free library. But I love the book. It's so beautiful. I loved your first
Thank
book, and it was just such a wonderful introduction. And I love your story. You're such an ambitious person. I don't know that everybody knows your history, so I'm just going to embarrass you a little bit right now if they don't. But you left Jerusalem when you were 17 to get a business degree from Wharton, like no big deal, totally average, whatever. And then you went to the London School of Economics, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then you were at McKinsey, you were at the World Economic Forum. And then you say, despite not thinking of yourself as a food writer, your priorities change. And if you don't mind, I know it's very weird when somebody reads back to me something that I said, but I loved this line from an interview where you said that there are thousands of people who could do the job that I was doing, but how many could also be the mother to my children that I am, and also safeguard this culinary treasure and share it with the world? Can you tell us a little bit more about this big career shift and your calling that you felt towards food? I want to hear it too.
You make it sound so perfect, and in hindsight, you look at it and it sounds like this trajectory that went up and everything was all easy and just it made sense. But at the time, I'd had my first kid in London. And I think, like any new parent, I panicked for 1,001 reasons. But one of them was this feeling that my daughter was going to grow up very differently to the way I had grown up. She was far away from her extended family, from this culture that had kept me rooted and grounded throughout my life. And I think at that point, I said, well, at the very least, I want to capture my family's recipes and stories and put them together in a way that she could carry on with her wherever she ended up in the world. And that's how I started compiling the recipes and stories. And it was once I saw them coming together that I thought, okay, they're my family's recipes, my family's stories, but taken together as a whole, they could be the story of any Palestinian family. And I'm sure, as you know, and many people listening, it's not the first thing you think of when you think Palestinian. You're probably thinking war and conflict and occupation and this and that. And it was a way to almost humanize our people and to share a narrative that was not so common with the world. So even though I had always said I'm never going to end up in the kitchen, it kind of, I published this book and it took on a life of its own. And my intention to go back to my real life obviously never materialized. And here we are today.
I think it's really interesting when you talk about, just there's the questions that I think that maybe the audience is super fascinated by, and then there's like stuff that I'm like, ooh, I find this really interesting. But this idea of not wanting to be in the kitchen because I'm a feminist and I'm a professional woman and I can do anything, and like, why would I be in the kitchen cooking for people? And I also felt that struggle a bit where I wondered if I was taking like a step backwards, which is such a shame because cooking is such an empowering thing and everybody needs to know how to do it. And it's such an important carrier of culture. How do you feel about it bunch of years into it? And of course, 2 cookbooks. Do you still feel that struggle, or do you wish you were doing economics? Hope not, because I don't wish you were doing economics.
So I'm going to be perfectly honest with you. I have my days. I think with time and with what I've done, I realize also I'm in the kitchen out of choice, not out of circumstance, which I guess shifts the
Mhm.
equation a little bit. There are days when I realize it's also a struggle to do this work that we do. It's a labor of love. And in many ways, it's harder than the alternative. But I also think 100 years down the line, when neither of us is here anymore, what kind of work that we have done will still have an impact. And similar to what you brought up before, there are 1,000 people who could be consultants, who can be the mother to my kid that I am. And there are still 1,000 people who can do the economics job, but how many people can actually do this contribution that you're giving to society, whether it's safeguarding your culture or creating an environment and recipes for people that can really bring them together the way your food and your food writing and your blog have done. So it's much easier, and I feel proud of what I'm doing now, much more so than I did at the beginning, when people would say, "What do you do?" And I wouldn't even dare say I'm a food writer. I say I used to be a consultant, and then I would go on to say what I'm doing now, and that has shifted now. So
Now I know we're going to talk about your second book, but I just, because my introduction to you was your first book,
mhm.
when your first book that came out, I read some interesting things about the reception of it, where people said they didn't even know anything about Palestinian food, and I would love to hear just a little bit more about the reaction from the world. It was a you got a James Beard nomination for it, but it won a bunch of other awards because it's such an amazing book. But tell me a little bit more about the reaction of putting this project in your head out into the world.
I had no idea what to expect when it came out. So for me, it was a couple of things. There was the reaction that I got from Palestinians who were in the diaspora. And for many of them,
Mhm.
it was they got a piece of home. And those are the messages that would sometimes bring tears to my eyes. The awards are great and it's validating. You realize there are people out there who know what they're talking about, who are saying what I've done is good. But then it's really the interaction one on one with your audience, the people that you're writing for, that really makes it worthwhile. I would hear from a woman who's 70 something saying, I haven't tasted this food since I left Palestine and my mother used to make it. And now I'm finally able to recreate these recipes and they taste the same. So that was very meaningful. And then there's the people who knew nothing about the cuisine, who knew nothing about the culture. And then they would say, oh my God, I had no idea that, for example, this is a Palestinian dish. Or I had no idea that this and this and that happened in your past or in your history as in your culture. And that to me felt also, it was a way to start a conversation that would endear people to your story so much more than one that starts out as like very political, which in general, when you're talking Palestinian people and history, it does tend to be political. So showing the human side of it almost made people more interested in learning about it and coming into the conversation.
That's really lovely. You begin this book.
You got it finally.
Oh, I'm very good at going in the mailbox. I'm a very high functioning professional here. In this beautiful book, you begin the book by talking about your father's favorite dishes and
Mhm.
how they kind of weren't yours. What are your favorite recipes from your childhood growing up in Jerusalem?
So one of them
Oh,
is
just easy question.
easy question. I know. I was like, it's like telling me to pick my favorite kid. There's so many that I love, but stuffed chicken, which is maybe not the most delicious recipe in the first book, but it was definitely my favorite one. And it's just a whole chicken
Mm.
that you stuff with rice and meat and pine nuts, and then you roast in the oven, and the skin is so crispy and crackly, and the rice is fragrant and spicy. I still don't like making it myself here because it doesn't taste the same. Even if I follow my mother's cooking techniques to a T, it's very different when she makes it. So that's one of my favorite ones from the first book. My father's fried eggs with za'atar as well. Super simple, but again, it's just sometimes I feel like food, the smells, it's the emotions that they evoke that make them your favorite more so than the actual flavor, maybe.
And also, I always think like your version 001 of the like your first version of the is the one that your mother, your grandmother made. And so it's always at most you're trying to recreate something that's quite far back and that you weren't really there. They can tell you how they did it, but I mean, for me, at my age, somebody's describing to me how they made something quite quite a few years ago. Um, but I This is, again, I don't know if this is as interesting to other people as it is to me, but I loved reading about your, not enjoyed that you had the struggle, but it was very interesting to read about your struggle with the book title, because I have been there several times and perhaps even now.
Oh.
Can you tell us the story behind the title, The Arabesque Table, and why you chose it? Because you talk about this a little bit in the intro.
Yeah, so I submitted my final manuscript and then the edits of that final manuscript and the photo shoot, and we still had no title in place. And I think, yeah, I was starting to get stressed about it, but in hindsight, it was okay. It was a good thing that that happened, because the title ended up feeding into what the book, how the book came about and what it was about, rather than forcing the book's content to fit into a specific title. So Arabesque is a pattern, an Islamic Arab art pattern of intertwined lines that infinitely go on into these designs. And I think one of the main things I want to come across in the book is that that is the history of cuisine. It is inherently cross-cultural and intertwined, and you cannot separate things from each other. What you can do is recognize the beauty in each individual line and try to highlight it. So that's where Arabesque really came about. And also, obviously, we're talking about the Arab world, but in another thing was I wanted this book to be honest. There were a lot of books coming out saying I'm this national cuisine or that, but at the same time including so many dishes that are fusion. And here I'm saying it is fusion, but call it what it is. It's not the Arab table, it's Arabesque. It has a lot of Arab elements. That's the thread running through it, but there's also influence from other cultures, from travel, so on and so forth. And then one silly one, which didn't make its way into the intro, I didn't write about it, was there's this ballet move, the Arabesque, where you have one foot firmly planted on the ground, your hand, yeah.
I'm
And so
not
I
going
thought,
to do it. You can't make me.
oh God, don't even get me started. But it's, in a way, if you think about it, you need to have one foot firmly planted in the past to really understand your histories, your roots, and your origin, but another hand reaching forward into the future. And I felt that's what this book was trying to do, kind of give a glimpse of what cuisine can be and evolve into, while still respecting the origins and the roots of where it had risen from. But I didn't write about that. I'm just telling you.
It's a beautiful reference, though. I love it. The fluidity of the ingredients, and you talk about this a little bit. Actually, let me go back a moment, because the new book features traditional Arabic recipes and recipes with Arabic influences. And I think some people might be struck by how fluid these cuisines can be. And you just talked about that a little bit, but I would love to hear, I just love hearing more about this fluidity. And do you think that people will be surprised by how fluid these two things are?
I think so. I mean, I myself was surprised in doing this research. There are so many things we take for granted. You ask any Arab person, what's your staple meal? And 9 out of 10 will tell you some kind of tomato-based stew with rice on the side. But rice was not a staple in our cuisine until probably the 20th century. Most people were poor and they ate wheat and its ensuing byproducts as their staple grains. Tomatoes didn't make their way into our part of the world until the 19th century. So if you think just 2 centuries ago, many of the foods we eat today did not look the way that they do now. Italy as well. I mean, people will say, oh, lasagna and pasta with tomato sauce. There was no tomato in Italy before the 18th century. So you start to realize that food is constantly changing, and we don't realize how much, and it all depends on the lens with which you're looking at it with. If you look in the lens of 100 years, okay, maybe it hasn't changed drastically. You look in the lens of 200 and then 500, and suddenly you realize, my God, I mean, nothing looked the way it did. And I think today that change is happening so much faster, just because internet and social media and information exchange is happening so quickly that you have, I saw this someone the other day, you can have a Lebanese guy on his Instagram following a Korean account, and the next thing you know, you have like some Arab dish made with gochujang instead of like shatta, which is our version of chili paste. And who knows, it's definitely fluid.
This is one of my favorite parts of actually the introduction, because I love when you talked about this fluidity of ingredients, and you talked about, as you just said, like when we think of Italy, we think tomatoes, and we think of, Swiss and Belgian food, we think of chocolate, and Thai, we think of chili peppers, and yet none of these three are native to the places. They've come from elsewhere. And I know I'm just like reiterating what you're saying, but you had said that there's this trend towards highlighting the nuances that set national cuisines apart. You said, we think of ourselves as cultured and sophisticated the more we know about the unique culinary traditions of individual
I did say
nations.
that.
But did I say that wrong?
No, I
Okay.
100% said that. Yeah.
Okay, I thought you said I didn't say that. I was like, oh no, shoot. But just the idea of a national cuisine is a relatively recent construct, which is what you said. And I was thinking, like, food just doesn't care about our arbitrary political boundaries. Like, it doesn't care. And I've personally found this lens very interesting, very helpful in understanding what we call Jewish food, which is to me like a
Right.
real motley crew of foods that are really just little pieces from all the parts of the world where people have lived and just picked it up. And this is a separate conversation. It doesn't always make sense to me, like as a cuisine, but it makes sense when I put it into the puzzle piece of where it came from, when I put it within the context. So I think that's a really important thing that you do in this book.
I mean, I think it's also important to realize those things are not mutually exclusive, right? So your cuisine can be very relevant to your national identity, the way with Jewish cuisine. And at the same time, you can understand how fluid and cross-cultural it is. And I guess that was a point I really tried to convey. I don't know how well I did it. Whoever, when you guys get the book, you'll let me know if it is the case or not. But the whole idea of national cuisine actually came about after the French Revolution. So before, it was you ate based on how wealthy you were. And then after that, you nationalized the cuisine of the Versailles Palace. And from there, people start using cuisine to galvanize nationalism as well. You see it in a lot of places. And so it can be relevant to who you are as a collective of people. You see it in Italy. If you go to Italy, they're probably fighting over the difference between Roman food and Milanese food and Sardinian and Sicilian and whatnot. But outside to the world, it's Italian, and we're all Italians. And I think that plays out everywhere. So food is regional at the end of the day, and it's important to understand that, to understand how it changes over time. But it doesn't negate the fact that it is important, whether it's Jewish cuisine or Palestinian or Italian, it is still important to that sense of identity that we form around food.
Does everybody find this as refreshing as I do to hear food speaking of this way? I love you have so much knowledge of the world of food and where everything came from. I read that it took you a few years of research for this book because the subject matter is, I just can't even imagine how vast. I would love to hear a little bit more about what your research entailed too, because I can't even imagine where you'd start. But apparently I had heard that you read through some medieval Arabic cookbooks too. Were you getting your parents involved? Like, Mom, Dad, could you work on this with me?
Oh God,
Could you read
called
these
my parents
texts and report
so
back to
much.
me?
Yeah, I would call my parents on Skype like 10 times a day. But it was funny. Someone once asked me, so were you interviewing people? I said, it's kind of hard to interview people that lived several centuries ago, but I tried my best with the books. So there's a lot of old Arab cookbooks on record from the Middle Ages. Luckily, there are two of them that were actually translated into English. So I got copies of those. And then I tried to juxtapose the original Arab versions against the English translation. And it's interesting to see how differently things can be construed based on the language you're reading it from and the length. But that was the primary research for the recipes and to kind of understand what the history looked like. But then there's also the academic route, which is reading all the research that's been written about national cuisine and cuisine and empire and the spice routes. And I remember getting this book. It's all about spices and the wars that were waged over them. And it could read like a fiction or the most thrilling TV show that you could watch on Netflix now. And it's just, I think the biggest struggle for me in doing this research was figuring out what part of it should make it into the book and what part I had to leave out. And my God, we deleted a lot of stuff. If they let me run the way I wanted to, they would have ended up with a 1,000-page book that nobody wants to buy or carry or read. So I'm glad we're at 250.
Well, I really love the head notes though, because each head note, it's not just like, I love this food or this was really great, which is, common, but you really have so much to say. And I think, it comes through, like, everything is like, it's never just about eggplants. It's about where they're from and how it's cooked and the different ways it is and how you've changed it. And to me, they're really the definition of what a great head note should be when it's pulling a dish from a part of history. Yeah, it's really wonderful. And I'm sure there's a lot of editing, but if it's one very strong paragraph, it's the best paragraph. Says,
I mean, coming from you, that means a lot
because paragraph before.
You're right. The best head notes, head essays of anyone I know. So for you to say that, thank you.
Very good editor. Well, thank you. But I do not write succinctly. It's an issue.
I know I
I
talk too
love
much and I
this
write too
quote.
much.
It's perfect for stuff like this. I love this quote. I'm sorry, I keep quoting you, but I really do like these quotes from an interview you did. And you said, what I was trying to do was start a conversation about the cross-cultural nature of food so we can realize how much influence we have on each other and be willing to learn from each other while at the same time showing respect for the tradition. And I know we've talked about this, the respect of recognition, but I love when you come at it from a place of respect because, it's true when we talk about like wars and things like disagreements, it's so hard. But when you talk about food, like food is objectively good to me.
Mhm.
So can you, almost knock my computer over. Could you elaborate on that a little bit?
So
Try
I
not to throw
think
the computer across the room.
I think this goes back to the issue we were talking about of putting a stake in the ground in national cuisine. And it's if we're going to try to hold on to something and not let it change and refuse to accept the way food evolves, we're going to miss out on a lot. With that said, if you change things without giving recognition to where you've learned it from or what its origins are, why it's meaningful to the people that you've learned it from, you're also erasing history that is so rich. And that's what I mean when I say we need to show respect. And as a Palestinian, I see this a lot. Obviously, the issue of culinary appropriation is front and center for many Palestinians. And I've said this on countless occasions. It's not about the chickpea, it's not about hummus, it's about something much deeper than that. It's about this willful erasing of a history or a past that existed. So when you don't recognize that something is from a certain culture or learn from a certain people, it's almost like saying they don't exist. And you see that a lot today with people, in food blogs and cookbooks and anywhere where someone will put a recipe out there. They will call it whatever they want. They will not cook it the way it's traditionally meant to be cooked. They will not say where the origins of it are from or why it was cooked that way in that culture. And then over time, if this continues happening, you erase whatever the origin of that dish was. And it takes a lot of research and digging to figure it out. And so I think these snapshots,
So
these
hard.
cookbooks that we do are, in a way, our effort at safeguarding those histories.
I mean, especially the way you did this one with so much history woven in. It's so great. I want to talk a little bit about the modernizing of cooking because that too has become contentious. You talk about adding modern twists to Arabic recipes from lentil soup and pistachio cake. And did you ever struggle with it? Did you ever worry about getting like angry letters from people who no longer recognize the dish because
Right.
it's not the way they grew up with it? And if you need any of those letters, I have several to spare
Oh,
from my
good.
own
So I'm not the only
writing.
one.
I have a whole collection of I will no longer be reading your website letters that I keep for posterity. But anyway, but I understand, but the feeling behind it is something that I absolutely understand. And I imagine with the weight of the history, the expanse of this book, you must have really, so did you ever struggle to figure out where to modernize, or was it always just, no, I want this dish to be this?
So it was something that I had to balance in a way. But I think for me, what helped was I did the Palestinian table, which was very much authentic, traditional. And again, I have an issue with the whole word authentic. Like it's what Palestinians have been eating for the last several centuries, and it's the dishes around which our identity is built and families consume and so on and so forth. With this one, I knew that I was, going into uncharted territory. I was going to put out dishes that for many people are unrecognizable. And I felt the only way to do that with integrity is to be honest about it and say, you know what, this is not, that's why it's not called the Palestinian Table 2.0 or whatever else. It's not even called the Arab Table. And that name was up in the running for the book. And I said, it's not an honest name to call it the Arab Table. So I tried my best to use all the text in the book to explain that and to say, this is not your mother's dish. This is not your grandmother's dish. It's different. And in the head note, I will tell you why or how it's changed and why it matters. Your kids, do you hear them?
I think it was laughing. I'm sorry. It wasn't crying. It was laughing. Of course, I got worried. Sorry. Please
It's okay.
continue.
I
This
can
is
never tell
way,
the
this is
difference either.
beautiful.
Mine are upstairs and I hear them as well. So We're in the
No,
same
but
boat.
this is great. I'm enjoying this so much. I like to talk to adults.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, that was it. It
I
was,
think that I think it's a real, I think that's it. You know, if you can talk about where a dish comes from, I think that's the part that gets lost. I think that this is something that comes up a lot, and everybody's going to deal with it in their own way. But like, it's important. You can't call something something if you don't know what that thing is. You know,
right.
it's one thing to make a change, and it's another thing to not even know what you're saying or what you're
Mhm.
changing or why. You know, I think the why is maybe the least important, but you know, to at least explain, like, I prefer it crispy, or I prefer it with this
Right.
herb or something like that, but to not even include that.
Or to say it was
Are
inspired
there
by this dish and it's changed, but don't call it by that same name. You know, don't say this is, I don't know, this is matlube, but hey, by the way, I'm not using eggplants or cauliflower, and I'm not using rice, and I'm not using meat. So what's left?
exactly. No, it's so hard, and I can't even imagine with the breadth of the work that you're doing, that how, you know, to balance it. But would you say that there are any sort of key ingredients that you would consider essential to modern Arabic cooking, you know, that you feel like are really important for this book? So everybody wants like they want the shopping list. What are the, would you say there are a few ingredients that you feel like are really have been essential in sort of helping you modernize these dishes in
So
the way that you want to?
yeah, I think it's a lot of the ingredients that I would say are important if you want the flavor profile are
Mhm.
ingredients that really amp the flavor of the dishes without being too cumbersome to find. So things like preserved lemon. If you put that, I
Mhm.
use it sometimes in pastas, right? And it's still a
Mhm.
pasta, it's still, you know, an Italian dish, but that flavor will give it a bit of a Arab flair, if you will. Things like sumat also, things like za'atar, things like tahina. And that was part of the reasoning for splitting the book up by ingredient, is sometimes you have a lot of one ingredient in your pantry. And if you're not used to cooking Arabic food, you're like, what am I going to do with this? Is it going to rot in my fridge basically before I find another recipe? And here it kind of makes it easier for you to figure it out. But also, I think, with the exception of those very unique ingredients like sumac and za'atar and preserved lemon and tahina, a lot of our food is just about the combination of spices. So things like allspice, cinnamon, cardamom, cumin, things that are common to everyone. Everybody uses them. It's just the way they come together and with what other ingredients that are common, rice, eggplants, cauliflower, etc. The way you combine those together really makes it easy. So I would say you can stock your pantry with just a few very basic things like tahini and sumac and some basic spices, and you can make probably the majority of the recipes in this book. So you don't need to go hunting for crazy things. No.
And spices keep, and tahini keeps pretty well.
Right? Yeah.
um, have your children embraced the cross-cultural culinary approach you like? Do they like the modern, is it chicken fingers, or is it caramelized butternut squash fata, which I hope I'm pronouncing
Sushi.
correctly?
It's, I mean,
What do you think my kids are eating out there right now?
I know. It's like, I mean, I will make the most elaborate meal and my kid will look at me, the old one, and she's like, I want sushi. And my
Oh
younger
my
one's like,
God.
no, I like mama's food. So they go through phases. They're both not the best
Oh,
eaters, and the irony is not lost on me. But part of the reason we started cooking a lot more fusion, let's say at home, is the kids. Because when it was just me and my husband, I was cooking the same dishes I grew up on, the very traditional ones. And then you have your kids saying, oh, but you know, I saw this in a book or in a TV show, and my friend ate this and I want that. And so a lot of times they want tacos. So we end up making tacos, but really what we're having is shawarma just wrapped up in tortilla bread. So they're
that sounds amazing to me. I definitely want to eat that. I will come over. Philly is not that far,
please
so
come
as soon
over.
as
I
we're all
know.
vaccinated, in what looks like a beautiful kitchen.
Thank you.
um, so I don't want to talk about kids too much, but since we chatted so much
Yeah.
we chatted a bit over the last year about, at times, what felt like the impossibility of
Mhm.
managing everything in the pandemic: kids, homeschooling, jobs, book deadlines, you know, all of this. And I think that post-vaccination, most of us would be pretty happy to literally never discuss COVID again. Like that would be fine. But while we're still in this place, I happen to really love what it's done for home cooking. I really feel like it's made it so much more practical. I feel like
Mhm.
people have gotten much more confident in the kitchen. And even if you never want to look at a dried bean again because you overdid it last March, I really love the energy I see towards cooking. How has the pandemic changed your cooking style?
In a couple of ways. We used to eat out on weekends, so we don't eat out anymore. We cook almost everything at home, which on the one hand is healthier, on the other hand, it's exhausting. To cook some of the stuff is leftovers, but to cook 5 to 7 days a week is a lot. And so one of the things that's ended up happening is I used to feel like I need to cook a proper meal for dinner every night. And now there are nights where I'll just make, fried eggs, and we'll have labane and cheese and pickles and olives. And my daughter will look at me and say, "Are we having dinner or are we having breakfast now?" And I don't think she's being super cynical, but she's like, "This is breakfast food." I'm like, "Yeah, it's what we're having for dinner. It's fine. It's good." So I've just become a lot more easygoing about what is dinner in our house. It can be simple stuff. It doesn't have to be an elaborate meal every time. So for that thing, COVID has been helpful. It's helped me, I guess, relax a little bit about what qualifies as dinner food.
The curse of the food writer, like recipe developer too, where usually when I'm cooking, I'm working on a dish, a capital D. It's something I'm testing and I want to
Mhm.
execute it really well. And I'm not as often just making scrambled eggs for dinner, but it became really helpful to pull those things up. And then I actually found myself going back a bit and being like, wait, why don't I have a good basic bolognese recipe on the site and stuff like
Oh.
that? So I felt like it kind of was able to feed it back. And then I started making these cookies that were a little easier and they were whole wheat. So I kind of didn't mind making them as often. And like little things I felt kind of circled back and fed my site in a good way and hopefully the cooking that I'm doing.
Mm,
But at the same time, I miss restaurants terribly. In
I
fact, I
know,
think
me
it
too.
was the week that everything shut down that we were supposed to go to Zahav. I think it was for my
Oh,
mom's birthday. We were going for an early birthday for her. And you know how hard it was to get a reservation there.
yes.
And I was so excited. And then we're like, should we go? Should we not go? Is it rude to cancel a reservation? Leave a restaurant in the lurch? Who
So you
knew?
ended up not coming to
Uh,
Philly in the end.
no, I mean, it was really like schools were shut down on Monday. It was that
Oh,
weekend.
wow. That
It
weekend, my
was
God.
that was, I know. Um, I was just like, because I think, anyway, there are so many great questions coming through. So I want to get to a few of them.
Okay.
Or I could talk all day, but I don't think anybody
I know
needs
it's
that
fun. I could do it too.
today. Well, you should, but like I should not right here. Somebody says the stuffed chicken is amazing. Now it's part of our holidays. So that's probably from earlier in our conversation. Somebody
Mm.
asked if you know any Palestinian restaurants in the Philadelphia area.
Palestinian, no, but I do know some Lebanese restaurants here, which is similar. I mean, but the thing with these restaurants is you're going to get the typical mezze and grills. You're not going to get the real home cooked dishes. There are a few in New York that have opened up though. So if you're willing to make the trek there, there's one
I'm
called
willing.
Qanun. Hmm.
Oh yeah? Okay, I'm gonna
Yeah,
ask
there's
you about this
two
later. I'm
actually.
like, I will make the
Yeah.
trek. I live here.
So there's two that are supposed to be
That's
very good.
awesome.
I haven't tried them. One is called Qanun, and the other one is I will dig up the name for you
Thank you.
and send it.
Oh my
But
God. I'm making my after plans. I'm so excited. Yeah, we also used to go out a lot on the weekends and I'd mostly cook Monday through Friday, and that's been a big adjustment for us too.
uh
All right. So the questions are, of course, maybe not like they're a little all over the place, but somebody asked, where and how did you learn about the history of cuisine? We kind of went into this a little bit, but
mhm.
it's is it something you can summarize
Sure. I mean,
briefly?
again, at this point, a lot of it is, if you're looking at history, a lot of it is archival research, right? So it's going through
Mhm.
textbooks, it's going through ancient texts, it's going through academic research papers. You can speak to people, but if you're trying to get into the past, you probably want to read more up on it because it's not something that, the people that are alive now and can tell you can go back maybe up to a century. But if you want to go further than that, you really have to dig through books. So I started this process, I would say at this point, 3 years ago almost. And one book leads to another book, right? I spent half the time reading the book and the other half reading the footnotes and the bibliography to figure out what their research was. And it's a rabbit hole. Don't go down it. It's long, but that's how.
Were you doing the research at used bookstores, online, at universities? How were you able to find some of these texts?
So
this is my question, not anybody else.
so some of it I did at Penn's library because I'm an alum, so I could just go there and pick out some books. But then there's a lot of stuff that's available online, like ebooks. And a lot of these textbooks, if you're going to buy the hardcover, you're going to spend $500, which I'm not going to do to buy a book. So you can get the e-version of it, and it's a lot more reasonable.
I'm imagining you have like a whole room in your house of all the texts and everything you've collected and all the printouts and the highlighted. No, I can't.
Well, right now there are 2 boxes in the garage since we moved. My husband put on them Reem books, cooking.
We have a box called Unfiled Files that we've carried through 3 apartments now. So
oh wow, yeah. So you know the struggle.
I'm just waiting long enough for it to be completely irrelevant what's in there, and I can just throw the whole box
and then you can toss it out.
We're almost there. And so that same person you were asked about where you learned about the history cuisine says Annie says hi, Anny.
Oh, okay. So I know who this is. Got it.
Okay. Okay, I'm gonna try to. I think there's a hummus. Okay, this is a little bit. I think this got a little mixed up. But somebody was asking. Okay, there's a sort of a mixed up question. I can't really read it clearly, but there's something about like.
I think they're asking if like hummus is better in
Haifa or New York or Philadelphia or Hava Ganoush, Baba Ganoush. That's you can jump in there anywhere you want.
I mean, I think they're asking if like these foods are better locally there or here in the US. That might be what the question is, but I think so. Yes, in general. I mean, if it's a place where the ingredients are native to that place and it has been made for generations and generations, it is better than what you can make here with different ingredients and without the same experience. But you can come close.
So much competition. You can go to entire streets of one type of food, and this person does it this way, and then everyone has an opinion. But it's a lot easier when there's a lot more competition. I always use that when people talk about like where the best bagels are in New York. I'm like, they're better because they're on every block here, or they used to be, or it certainly seems like it in my neighborhood still. But there's so many places to go that you have a lot of people competing for the same market. I imagine that it's like that on a global scale with local cuisine too. This could be a very long answer or a very succinct one. I will leave it to you. But somebody asked, what were some of the most surprising things you discovered through your research? Do you have any favorite tidbits you picked up?
Yeah, so there's a lot of stuff.
I want to hear them all. We have 20 minutes, so you can just go right in.
I'll just answer that question. And I mean, look, I'll keep this very short because I see there's a lot of other questions coming in. The biggest surprise to me, and I'd heard this anecdotally, but it wasn't until I dug into the actual content that I realized just how influential Arab cuisine has been throughout history. In large part, probably because the first cookbooks on record are Arab cookbooks. But 2 tidbits. One is Ottoman cuisine. You know, a lot of people will go back and say, oh, you know, what is your cuisine in the Levant? It was influenced by the Ottomans. The very first Ottoman cookbook was a translation of an Arabic cookbook. So that tidbit was very interesting. The other one was speaking of bagels. So I always, you know, I read the book, The Bagel, and it traces their origins to 16th century Poland. And from there, they say, you know, to the royal family in Poland in the 1300s. And then I was randomly looking through this 13th century Arabic cookbook, and there's a chapter on breads, and in it there's this little section on ka'ik, which are apparently so common we don't need to include a recipe for it. But here are a few variations of it. One of them is put the rings of dough on a dowel, boil it in water, and bake it. And I was like, oh my God, this is a bagel, basically.
It's a bagel.
I was like, this is crazy. So stuff like that to me was fascinating to realize. And then also along that line, you look in China, and in the place that the trade routes where Arab merchants were traveling to trade spices, they have the same thing. It's called gerdanan, and it's a bagel. I mean, if you look it up on Google, it literally looks like a bagel. And it's so funny to see that where these trade routes went, everybody has a version of this ring-shaped piece of bread. So
I love it. I would like to hear about this like all day. This is what I was talking about when I talked about like Jewish food being a little bit confusing to me unless I can put it in context somehow. This idea that there were round breads, and we might sometimes what we associate it with are just the people who are making it the most loudly or the most published.
Mm-hmm.
And then we forget that they're like in other parts of the world, or there's a larger population of people still making it versus a population that's very small on the world map.
Mm-hmm.
But I find it so interesting. Want to hear about like all the things that are bagels in the world. Like that's the article I want to read. All the bagels of the earth. Ooh, so this one, I think this came up and we did talk about this a little bit, but who has the right to write a cookbook about a particular cultural ethnic cuisine? I feel like I've seen this conversation a lot in the last year over food publications, and it's the way asking it like that always feels a little bit like the right is a very loaded
Look,
subject, but I'm curious
it's
to hear. Yeah.
I go back and forth on this myself when I think about it. And here's what I think. If you're going to write a book about something, you have to make sure you're going to do that thing justice. Like you cannot just say, hey, I'm going to go to this country for 3 months, visit it and talk to some people, and then I'm going to come back and write a cookbook on it. I don't, if you want to write about Palestinian food, I think it doesn't matter what race, religion, color, gender you are, you can write about it, but make sure you have lived there long enough, you have experienced the food, the people, the history, and that you've researched it well enough, and then you can speak about it. But I think, and this again goes back to the issue of respect, is if there are people in that from that population who can speak, then give them the platform and let them. But if there's someone else who, and I guess this was more previously rather than today when everybody almost has a platform and can talk, but I'm thinking like of restaurants that opened up in the US by chefs who are not native to the cuisine of the restaurants that they were opening up. But at the same time, they had spent like 20 or 30 years living in that country, experiencing its food and getting to know its people. And here they are trying to bring it to the US. I don't see a problem with that. I don't think that that's culinary appropriation. And some people might disagree with me on that. And again, as always, the crux of the issue, I think, is never the food. It's what you're, who's benefiting from it. So that becomes the issue when you have a non-native writing about a native cuisine. You're writing about it, you're getting the publicity, people think you're making the money, even though there's not much money in food writing, but you're benefiting. But you're benefiting from this thing, and what's happening to the local population? Or you're opening up a restaurant that is cuisine X, Y, Z, and you're benefiting and you're, again, making your career out of it. But what about the local population who isn't able to? So that's why I go back and forth, because again, as I rambled on for like 2 minutes, it's hard to tell exactly who and when, but I think you have to try your best to be as honest as you can if you're going to even endeavor to write about something that is not your own.
I think it makes a lot of sense. And I think this is a really important conversation that needs to be had. I think a lot of the messes, a lot of the noise of not noise, but that have happened because people aren't really doing the research and explaining where they're coming from. And I also feel that it's okay that everyone has their unique view. And I think it's okay to have that, but you don't have to call it like authentic Palestinian food if it definitely is not. You can say, I've always loved these flavors of Palestinian food, and here's how I apply it to my cooking, rather than saying this is a Palestinian dish, which is ridiculous, or something 100%. Else. And this could be true with a million things, where it's like, I have very little expertise outside what I grew up in, but I can say that I love the flavors of this and I wanted to apply it to something that traditionally is not. Boom. I want to hear people's unique outlook. That's I want to hear who you uniquely are and what you can uniquely bring to food. And if you're just trying to, you're going to do a pale imitation of something or an inauthentic one, it's a very kind of weak story to tell.
100%. There's
so many good questions here. How do you see Palestinian cook? I know I'm put my reading glasses on. How do you see Palestinian cooking changing over the next 20 years? This is a really good question.
It's interesting. I mean, I think you will still have a lot of the same dishes that are very significant to the Palestinian culinary repertoire, things like maqloube, maftoul, etc. But I think you might start seeing some move towards, I notice this because I follow some of these groups on Facebook and Instagram where people are like, we want a vegan version of this or a vegetarian version of that, and everybody's up in arms and fighting about how you cannot veganize, I don't know, maqloube or mensaf or whatnot. So I think you might see a trend in that direction. You might see some ingredients making their way into the kitchen from other cultures, but by and large, I think it's a cuisine that is very rooted in the landscape and the geography. So I wouldn't expect any massive changes to the dishes that are, let's say, the crowns and or the jewels in the crown that is Palestinian cooking.
I don't think we want them to change, really. I mean, it's
I
great to see
know.
modernizations that are delicious, but it's, I also would like to know where the food
Keep
came
the good
from.
stuff. Yep.
Exactly. My aunt used to make stuffed dates with almonds and simple syrup. Do you know the origin of these? Here I'm like, well, every place that has dates and every place that has almonds.
So I
um,
think dates are native to or they grow in the Arab world. And they were traditionally actually, if you go back historically, people say that the Prophet Muhammad used to only eat dates and camel milk, and that was their primary source of nutrition. Uh, I don't know where the origin of the dish she's talking about with syrup, because dates are
mhm,
super sweet. I don't know why you would need to add
mhm.
syrup, but we stuff dates with almonds, pistachios, walnuts, and it's common across the Arab world. So
It's
probably somewhere
delicious.
there it originated, but
I'm like, and what do we stuff them with here? Almonds. Oh, we wrap them in bacon. That's what we do here.
sometimes you stuff. I've seen people stuff them with almond butter and peanut butter. Same concept, just easier to chew. Maybe I don't know.
I think there's a version where you put some cheese in them. It was totally unnecessary to
Oh,
me. Um, um, oh, this is a good question for you. Somebody said, I love your cookbook. I made a number of dishes from the Arabesque table over the weekend, and they were all delightful. I'm curious
thank
to hear
you.
more about your thoughts on the burgeoning academic field of food history, where food is understood as political. The Arabesque table is your addition to the history. I'm wondering what more you'd like to see in this literature.
I think the most important thing is academic writing tends to not be accessible to most people. And to sift through academic text and academic writing is not necessarily fun or easy for the average person to do. So I think what we need to do, or what I would personally like to see in this field, if you want people to really take on the responsibility of learning the history and origins of foods and what we eat, is more writing that is accessible to the masses. So not just the ivory tower publications, but cookbooks like the one that I wrote that any person can pick up and read and learn the history and at the same time enjoy and be able to use the book. So I think that's what I would like to see. And also, I think cookbooks sometimes get a bad rap because they're not as rigorously fact checked and edited as an or peer reviewed like academic text. And I think it would help to see more cookbooks that go through a slightly more rigorous process, especially if they feature a lot of history and cultural information. And I think that might add to that sphere that he was mentioning.
I agree. I've literally asked this as I've been in my editing process before, and I know that they've made some changes at my publisher, but it was something that came up in my last book where I'm like, do you have somebody who can help me academically?
Yeah,
Obviously it's my job, but just to like when you're doing the
but
fact
still.
checking and you're doing the
Mhm.
editing, do you talk about that, or are you just assuming that all of my research is perfect? 'Cause that is terrifying.
Right?
That is like
Yeah,
very scary.
100%.
Um, Let me see. There's one in here. Oh, I love this because I just read about this for the first time last week. Could you talk a little bit about nafas? For sure, my grandmother had it. I inherited her passion for cooking, but I wonder whether I have it too. What is
Oh, that's
nafas? Did I say
so.
it right?
Yeah, you did. So I wrote this
Okay.
piece that came out, when was it? Last week. Nafas means breath or spirit.
I'm so sorry. I read about it last week. I forgot you wrote it. I'm sorry.
It's okay.
Okay.
Most people didn't notice. I mean, like the writer's name is like literally up there in font
I
that you need
always check
glasses to
Phaidon.
see. So it's okay.
It was
I
a great
mean,
piece.
someone I know sent me the articles. Hey, I thought of you when I read this. I was like, yeah, I wrote it. And they're like, oh, oops. So
Well, I
please do
read about
not
it from
feel
you.
bad.
So tell us some more.
So nafas just means breath or spirit, if translated literally. But in the context of cooking, it refers to, I guess the best way to describe it would be an energy that someone possesses that makes their food taste exceptional. And I think a lot of it, a lot of the people that I spoke to said it's basically like cooking with love. That's what the equivalent would be if you were speaking English. To say someone has nafas means they're welcoming when I go to their house. Their food is generous. They want to feed me. And that whole experience makes you enjoy the food so much more than if it was just here, stuff your stomach and go with this dish. So that's kind of what nafas means. But a lot of cultures have it as well.
Concept.
Hmm.
But it's such a beautiful concept though.
Yeah.
It's lovely. I like the idea of like it's like that extra piece too.
Yeah.
Somebody wants to know a little bit more about the beautiful photography in the Arabesque Table, and especially given I know because you weren't able to initially shoot it when and where you wanted to, but the photography is beautiful. How did you go about the photography? Did you work with the team? Did you have a style? Did you style everything yourself? I'm like gonna hold up a beautiful spread. Okay. Okay, I'm really good at this. Great job, Deb. Nailed it.
Wonderful, Deb. No, I love it. It's actually the same photographer as the first book, and he's great. He lives back in Tel Aviv, and I actually traveled back home to do the first photo shoot for the first book. And this one, I wanted to work with him again, and that's why I went back home and did it. And actually, it was Phaidon, the publisher, that found him the first time around. And he did such a phenomenal job that I said, I want to work with him again for this book. And of course, they were on board. So, and yeah, no prop stylist, no nothing. It was literally me, him, and my mom. And especially because it was COVID, it was literally just that skeleton crew. So she and I would cook. He and I would try to style it, which was a bit frustrating because neither of us is a professional stylist, but works. It's probably why I don't see that many props in the book either.
I don't know. It's never really done it for me to have a rusty spoon next to food that I want to eat anyway, or like some weathered barnwood. But you're talking to somebody who's been styling on the same two counters for 15 years. So on plain plates, I think it's really beautiful, and I love the idea. Like I think it's really beautiful for people to know that it's you and your mom who cooked this food. It wasn't a team. No. It wasn't. Nobody was dabbing it with hairspray or anything like that.
Oh God, no. We
had a delicious feast.
Yeah, we ate almost everything you see in that book.
I love this. I'm not oh yeah, it just looks so beautiful. It just looks handmade and gorgeous and beautifully lit.
Thank you.
All right, we probably have time for a few more questions. I'm just going to keep going. I want to ask. Okay, I think we hit that. You researched the history of food in the region. If you were to speculate, what do you think the cuisine in the future Levant would look like?
I think, again, similar to the Palestinian cuisine in the future, probably a lot of the same traditional dishes, and you might start seeing some foreign influence here and there, not maybe similar to the book, I guess.
Interesting. Somebody wanted to, this is another photography question. Okay, but this is just one of these things that interests me because as somebody who writes cookbooks. Also, somebody wanted to know why you chose not to feature photos of food on the cover. I think
that wasn't
because it's such a beautiful cover.
So that wasn't the publisher, Phaidon, they're known for producing very beautiful, artsy coffee table type books. They actually pick the covers themselves. I don't have much of a say in the cover, but again, I went with the same publisher the second time around, knowing that because I think they do such a good job on the quality of the books that they produce, the distribution, and in a way, it makes it timeless, right? So I don't mind not having food on the cover.
It's really beautiful. I don't have I cannot speak for every one of their cookbooks, but I very rarely see dishes on the cover of their cookbooks.
Yeah, every now and then you'll see one.
People,
not much.
Yeah, it looks great. Well, it's really beautiful. It's such a gorgeous pattern too. All right, there were a bunch of questions about buying ingredients. Do you have favorite places
about preserved
to buy
lemon
the ingredients?
Also, yeah.
I know. I was going to get the preserved lemon, which of course you have a recipe in here, don't you? Or do you have a recipe just in your first book for?
I had one. I don't know if it got cut or not. I think the preserved lemon recipe might have gotten cut. I definitely know it was in there at one point.
Well, that's okay. You're going to get me to make yogurt for the first time. Every time I read a recipe, everyone's like, it's so simple. And then it's like, but you need a slow cooker or you need an Instapot. I have all these things. I just don't want to take them out to make a cup of yogurt, or you need a starter. And then I read your recipe and I'm like, I might do this tomorrow. Like I might do this tomorrow.
Not that hard, yeah. But sometimes it's hit or miss.
Your yogurt recipe.
Sorry, what was that?
I'll call you.
Oh yeah,
sorry. I'll call you and complain. I'll just send you an angry letter.
I mean, angry letter. I'm never going to read your books again, Reem.
You can add it to the collection. So where do you get where do you recommend that people get ingredients? I guess you probably have local favorites and probably some online stores that you like. What would you recommend to people who want to get ingredients that are more specific that maybe their local store doesn't have?
Sure. So spices, I buy a lot in bulk online. Kalustyan's in New York. I used to love going there when I could go to New York, less so now. Here in the local area, I mean, in the Philly area, there's a few places. Bustleton Avenue has a couple of Middle Eastern grocers. I think one is called El Jannah and one is called El Amana. Again, that's Bustleton Avenue. South Jersey has one called Amon Market. Allentown, of course, has two very big supermarkets. So there you can get your basics. But when it comes to spices, I would say go online, research which, sometimes I will buy different spices from different places. Like this spice vendor is known for cinnamon. This one is known for the allspice that comes from Jamaica, etc. So for your spices, go online. I saw someone ask about preserved lemon. They actually sell it in Whole Foods and Wegmans too. So it's pretty easy to access. If not, I do know that the farmers market in Bryn Mawr on Saturdays, one of the vendors sells a lot of Moroccan products, including preserved lemons, olive oil, I think harissa. There's a bunch of other ingredients that they sell. So that's on Saturdays in Bryn Mawr.
Somebody asked if you have a favorite local restaurant in Philadelphia.
I do, but they're going to make fun of me when I tell you. So my favorite restaurant, there are two. They're holes in the wall and like 11th and Washington. One is called Pho 75. It's just all it sells is pho, and that's it. And right next to it is one called Sky Cafe. And these are not fancy. These are not like nice places you go out for date night. These are just places that are so satisfying. One is Indonesian and one is Vietnamese. But yeah, those are up there.
I mean, I want to go. I want to go everywhere.
Come. I mean, soon.
Come. It's not that hard for me to go to Philly in general. I mean, in non-pandemic times. Are there other Palestinian food writers, recipe developers, cooks, home cooks who you like to follow or look for inspiration? This might be almost better written so people can jot it down. But I'd love to hear if you have other favorite follows or people you recommend.
So there's been a huge rise in bloggers or I don't know, bloggers if that's the right word. I think they call them influencers now on Instagram, who there's a lot of Palestinian Arab women who are doing this, and actually a lot of them do very good work. So I can jot down the names in the chat box later, and they can send it around. In terms of other Palestinian food writers, there's quite a few here in the U.S. Again, I could list them off right now, but I could also put them in the chat box. It might be easier. Sami Tamimi is one of the names that's probably very well recognized because he works with Ottolenghi. There's Layla Al-Haddad, who wrote the Gaza Kitchen. There's Rabia Bishara, who owns the restaurant Tanureen in Brooklyn, and she also published a couple of cookbooks. And then in terms of Instagram, there's one that I really like. Her name is Mai, but her account is called Almond and Fig, and she does a very good job of telling both the history and the stories for Palestinian food. So
it's wonderful. All right, one last question. Since there is not a Palestinian restaurant in Philadelphia, do you want to open one? Would you consider it? No.
I've always said this. I'm not a chef.
Anthony Bourdain, why would I open a restaurant?
I mean, people have asked me this since the day one, since the book came out, and I'm not a chef. I'm not a cook. I'm a food writer, and I think each person should recognize where their strengths are. Mine is in telling these stories and sharing the stories of these food. And obviously I need to know how to cook them, but I think running a restaurant is a whole other beast in and of itself. It's operating a business. It's about consistency. It's about staffing. It's about your bottom line. And for me, food is so much a labor of love that I think if I were to run a restaurant, a lot of that would be lost. I love to cook for my friends and my family, and I've been telling you for like years now that I owe you a Palestinian meal, but eventually it'll happen.
I'm going to show up. I am so excited about this. This was so much fun, Reem. Your book comes out tomorrow. They are going to have copies will you be signing books? Tell me where you're going to be signing books where people can order signed books.
So Joseph Fox is the bookshop that's associated with the library. I think the books have arrived. I'm going to be signing them this week. So anyone who orders from them will get a signed copy of the book. And I think the link, Laura just put it in the chat. Yeah, Joseph Fox Bookshop.
Great. Awesome. So the book comes out tomorrow. This is so exciting. It's a wonderful book. I've been enjoying it. This is a forever book. I feel like it's a
Thank
forever
you,
book
Deb.
because there's so much history in here. There's so much knowledge that I can't imagine not being able to look up or dish when I need to know more about it. So thank you for writing a book that will be on my shelf forever.
Thank you for
And
doing
for
the same
chatting
for
with
me.
us tonight. Thanks for hanging out while I hide my kids in my bedroom. Sorry.
Boy, this has been the best, hour of my day today. Quiet, nice conversation. Someone taller than 3 feet. So
Somebody put the kids to bed.
exactly.
Exactly. Well, this was a treat and good luck with
For me
everything.
too.
And thank you everyone else for coming tonight.
Thank you,
This
guys.
was really fun and asking good questions. Okay, bye.
Bye.